Welcome to episode 2 of Quest 1. This is going to be a big jump. So let's look at what's expected of you in this episode. So now that you have the code working, which was the objective in episode 1, I want you to really use Python type, hints, and annotations as well as Pydantic to simplify the entire code base. Now, in order to understand how to do this, you need to look at this video over here, Mastering Python Type-ins. It will go into Python type-ins, typing and annotated, and Pydantic, and it will basically explain exactly how to do this. The requirements are that you use type-ins and annotated types. And what you need to do with that is, firstly, let me explain how the code needs to be structured. So, at the heart of your application, you have your domain layer. And within that domain layer, I want you to define annotated types that has the constraints on them. The constraints are these: health must be an integer between 1 and 100. Attributes must be values between 1 and 100 as well. Those are two of the constraints. And I also want you to define the description for every field on there, on these annotated types. Then I want you to build your domain model, which is the character model over here. And that will consist of one value type. Value types are types that you sort of combine into your domain model, but they typically do not have IDs. They are defined by the values. That's why you call them value types. So that's the first mission over here, defining that inner layer, the domain.py file. Once you've done that, then the second file that you need to focus on is the application.py file. Application is, you can think of it like an API that will interact with your domain layer, but also it will have the use cases in there. Another way to think of use cases is the logic of your application. Some of the logic will be in the domain. For example, what we talked about earlier, there was 1 to 100. That invariants, they will be in the domain. So you're protecting your domain data with certain rules. Those rules will never change. For example, no application logic will be able to work outside of that 1 to 100 boundary. So you want to define it in the domain. Otherwise, you need to keep on defining it in every part of your application. So the way to think about this is domain logic, you only want to create it once. And then all of the application logic will reuse that. But certain things do not belong in the domain. And that's one level out of the domain. So for example, if you have a certain scenario that is covered by the application logic, but it's not necessarily an invariant that's inside the domain layer, then that will belong in the application layer. So that type of use case will be there. And things like create new character will be in a use case, as an example. And generating the ID typically could be in the domain. It could also be in the application. And sometimes it's a gray area. It's not 100% clear what should always be in the domain layer or what should be in the application layer. What is very clear is that technologies and frameworks that interact with the application layer should be in the delivery layer. That's one of the outer layers in most of our applications, the outermost layer of the application design. And then the way you send data into the application layer is through data transfer objects. That's the DTO object. So you'll see all of these terms appear in the spec. So the API, now we're talking about the delivery layer, that's the outer layer. That's where your fast API, your route definitions, the mapping to the DTOs will be in here. And any fast API code will be in this file, api.py. No business logic, no application logic, no domain logic is in this specific file. So then the next file that you'll focus on will be this dto.py file. That's where you define the data transfer object. How do you transfer data from the delivery layer to the application layer? When I'm saying transfer, What do I mean? I basically mean that you will create an object for one of these DTO objects. That's where the name comes from, data transfer objects. And you'll pack the data into that object. And then you will call a function in the application layer, and you will pass that object into that function. So that's how you transfer the data into the application layer. Basically calling a function in the application layer with the data. Instead of passing them as a lot of parameters, or instead of instantiating the character object in the fast API outer layer, you are creating the data transfer object and you're sending that in. Why are you doing this? This creates a loose coupling between your inner layers and your outer layer. When I say loose coupling, I mean there's not a direct dependency established here, which gives you a lot of flexibility. For example, you'll see in this episode that you have a command line interface as well as a potential challenge. That's one of the bonus challenges. But the beauty of this structure is that the command line interface will use that exact same logic. All you have to focus on when building the command line interface is I just need to pack the stuff into the data transfer object and send it off. And then also data transfer objects get the data back as well. One of the other important things is that all of the logic that interacts with the JSON file should be in this repository.py file. You don't want any JSON interaction logic in anywhere else in your code. Nothing. So what you will do, and you're also not going to send the data transfer objects into the repository layer. This is an important nuance. So for example, if you create a new character, you could think of it like this. You could think, okay, I'm going to send in the data transfer object, and I'm just going to send this data transfer object into the repository, and the repository will store it in the JSON file. That would be wrong. So you want to establish the object. Now it feels like wasted code here. Why are we establishing the character? The reason for this is the invariance. By establishing the character, and there could be more invariant, there could be logic there that we fire the moment the character gets created that will check a few things for us. So you want to establish the character so any business logic that's built into the domain will trigger at that moment before you add anything to your repository. The only thing that goes to the repository is the character. Now, what you do sometimes do, and this is a good idea, is you create a schema. It's similar to a DTO, but it's not meant for transfer. It's meant for storage, especially if you're storing into a file structure like JSON. Then you can validate against the schema before you store it in the database. So we're not doing that in this quest, but that is what we do typically in production. So you make 100% sure anything that gets stored into the document file storage adheres to the schema. And you can have different versions of the schema as well. All right, so bonus challenges here would be doing the command line interface. And then your learning outcomes, I want you to understand how to protect your code using Python typing.Annotated. Now, typing.Annotated on their own do not protect your code, but if you use it, or they don't protect your data, because they're only for the coding environment. They don't really affect Python. But if you use them in combination with Pydantic, that's where the real protection comes in, because Pydantic is a runtime environment that protects your data as it flows. For example, if you package any data into the DTO that does not adhere to the DTO standards, you want it to fail right there at the outer layer in your fast API. Now, where the magic really comes together is how all of these things work together. So like fast API looks at the Pydantic object and it extracts information and builds the documentation for you, builds the OpenAPI spec for you, builds everything that you need automatically. Once you see that, you see, wow, this is great, because what you'll see is that by defining a field in the domain, one of those annotated types, you're reusing that annotated type to build your data transfer objects, and Fast API is absorbing the data transfer objects to create all of this for you, and everything really becomes easy. So that's what I want you to see, and that's really the objective of this entire episode too. Good luck. And if you have any challenges or you need some assistance, reach out to us, and I will see you in the walkthrough of Quest 2. Quest 1, episode 2. Cheers.